Now, Jeanette, first of all, hopefully you're not feeling too stressed. I'm very pleased to see you. And you've got a second to take a deep breath, because we've got a very important topic to talk about today, haven't we? And I know also a topic very close to your heart. So why don't we start, I think, to give us the context, because you've had an absolutely fascinating career, I know that. To give the audience some context, why don't you talk us through your journey today, and then I'd really like to dive into a couple of key moments in your career journey, and understand those further. So tell us how you got here.
Thank you. And as always, Nina, it's always such a pleasure to connect. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And when I was 2, I went to live in Canada, which is the accent you hear in English. And when I was 9, I went to live in Mexico City. And then when I was 11, up until the age of about 17, I lived on the border of southern Switzerland, northern Italy. And I studied a lot of art history there, because that's what you did in school. And then I went my last couple of years to the US for school. And then I went back to Argentina, and I started my career with a college professor, actually, at IBM in research and analytics. And from there, I got hired into Oracle to do communications, and eventually became the head of Latin America marketing. And so was based out of Miami. Then I was sent into sales in Palo Alto at the headquarters, and I ran North America sales. And at that time, I was lucky enough to set up some call centers in Bangalore, which was a mind-blowing experience for me. I learned so much there. And then I went back to Latin America with Microsoft with the condition I could come back to Europe, because I really missed it. And I've been here ever since, doing either global roles or regional roles for marketing and communications, especially with digital. Spent a little bit of time in Philips as well, Philips Healthcare, and now I'm at Mastercard.
A really fascinating journey. And I think the thing that's particularly clear in the story you just told is the number of different countries and cultures that you have lived in and before you started your career, when you were growing up, but also during your career. I mean, Argentina, Canada, Mexico, Switzerland, Italy, US were the ones I wrote down. So tell me, which culture did you enjoy the most, and which challenged you the most?
Well, I do think, I think that time in Italy really formed me. And I didn't realize it then. But I went to school where on the weekends, the school would give teachers gas money if they took students to youth hostels and took them on journeys with them. So I was able to see Venice, and I was able to see Florence, and sail in different parts of Europe. And that gave me a natural lust for life and just how interesting and all the layers that Europe has that really stayed with me. And I didn't realize really until much later how much I loved it and how much I missed it. And so sometimes in life, the things that you're passionate about, they don't occur very explicitly. You realize them after, in a way. And I think in terms of challenge, because I've moved around 20 times by the time I worked at Microsoft, I was very shocked to be culture shocked during my first trip to China. I didn't think of myself as the kind of person who would ever be culture shocked. And I realized how small my world was, and how I was missing half the planet's history and culture and just a million things. And so it wasn't the Chinese or anything that I found intimidating. It was my complete lack of knowledge. And because I'm a technology nerd and an art nerd, I connected that way back to China. I tried to understand the business context for technology, and I tried to understand the history and the art, which I still love today. But But whenever I can, to this day, whenever I get to go anywhere in Asia, anywhere in China, anywhere in Japan, anywhere all over the continent, I go there because it makes me feel small and it takes me out of my comfort zone. But I come back so full of things that I would never have imagined. So I would have never learned them, you know?
And that's so interesting, isn't it? That your experience there was actually about realizing or shining a light on some things that you didn't know. So sort of widening your Johari's window actually beyond what you knew. And that was uncomfortable because you know so much about different cultures, right? So, and actually your response to that, to lean in and spend more time and really push yourself to learn in that discomfort zone or outside of your comfort zone, I think is interesting and very inspiring. So let's go to the first role you had in your career, because I know we have talked about this before, and I think it's very interesting, and particularly interesting for those young women at the beginning of their career now, watching this, or people who are mentoring, managing, coaching, even people at the start of their career. I know that you, your very first role, you were the only woman in the team, and in fact, I think the only woman in the building. Is that right? Going back to Argentina, aren't we here? I think. So to talk a bit about that and your experience and how you coped with that.
Well, I think my father has been a very formative person in my life. When he met my mother, for example, he paid for her she was going to get married, and he paid for her to get an education, to become a medical doctor, to become a psychiatrist, and to become a psychoanalyst. And ever since then, they've written about 30 books together. So I grew up with a role model of a woman who was very instrumented and educated, but confident in what she did. And at the same time, my father really fought. He led all the activism to get women into the university at that time when he was younger. So not everybody has the luxury of having a father who's a women's rights champion, but I think the insight is shareable. And what he always taught me was the one thing you can control in your career is your performance. And so, for example, they were quite free as parents, but every Saturday he would teach me to swim competitively, because when you swim, you can't afford to look to the right or left. You have to, you lose the race because it's so few seconds. So he would try to just get me to really focus on what I could control and perform. And a few months ago, I had the privilege of interviewing Ada Hegerberg, who's the woman footballer who's the first woman to ever receive the Ballon d'Or. And she said it very clearly, no performance, no voice. So she continues playing at the level she's at, so she has a platform to be an activist for women. And I think that's very, very important. So in Argentina, a lot of women worked by the time I started, but not in high technology. And so, but because I'd been so driven by my dad to perform, I didn't focus on that so much. I focused more on just delivering and performing. And at the same time, and I think my mother had a big role in this as well, she taught me how to be comfortable in being a leader in my own way. So not being a leader by becoming like everyone else in the room who was very alpha male, but being myself, but being the first one to jump in if there's a problem, being the person who tries to solve it, assuming I know what I'm talking about, right? But I think that's very important to be yourself, to be a leader in the way that's natural to your personality, but at the same time to be thought of, to be top of mind as a problem solver. Because I think we can all be leaders, no matter what title we have, but it's that power to jump in that's very, very important. And what I would say to women on the call who are just starting their career is less so nowadays, but one thing they might hear is that women can be emotional at work. And I would say to take that with a pinch of salt, because, for example, some emotions like enthusiasm are a superpower. What more do you want than to work with someone that listens to you and, champions you and is enthusiastic, right? So expressing things that can be inclusive and that can be positive are important. And we all do it in our different ways and in our different personalities, but making sure you have a voice. So performance, but finding a way to have a voice in there is important.
And your own voice. I mean, you covered so much in that, which is so powerful. Be leadership in your own authentic way. The fact that everybody can lead, leadership isn't just for the people at the top of the organization, is it? And actually emotion being a superpower, not something to be looked down on if it's harnessed and shared in the right way. And I actually particularly love something you said at the beginning of that, which was focus on what you can control as well. But it's very easy, isn't it, to get caught up in, well, they said they're doing that, well, this is happening over there, and what's this? And actually, what's in your gift is the only thing that's really worth spending your energy on, isn't it? So that's your. So if you think about where you are today and your role now, what would you say are the things that you really are your superpowers as a woman in marketing? Your secret to success?
Well, I think something I learned a bit early on, for me, and it might not work for everyone, was to differentiate being a good manager to being a leader, which, like we just discussed, anyone really can be a leader. There's so many situations where people who have the least give the most, and that can be extremely compelling. And I do think it's very important that you know yourself and that you know what you do well and what you have an ease for, and you know the areas you're not strong in, and build muscle there, whether it's budgeting or planning or whatever it is. But I think that the table stakes is being a very strong operational manager, even in marketing. But from there you lead. And I think what works for me is, once in that operational space, is giving a lot of room to other people who do it better than you do, whatever it is, budgeting, planning, media, whatever it is that's better than you. But in the strategy, having a very clear idea of where you want to go, where you want to arrive at. In my case, it's the visual look and feel, and it's the message of a campaign I'm doing. I think sometimes I can be very easygoing, but about that, I don't negotiate. It really needs to be what my mind's eye has seen, and not negotiate on the message, not add or detract. And I think one element of marketing that is very also purposeful is to do something that has meaning. So to champion something, or to talk about topics that are a little risky, because you're trying to do the right thing. Like my father, who led the riots to have women in the university, right? You can do that in certain brands. And so I think one caveat is, in what you can control your performance, but you can also, once you get established in your career and you have a little bit more degrees of freedom, you can also choose the environment to work in up to a point. Or you can at least see what environments are not for you, because having opportunities as well, and having leaders who are leaders matter. So I think I think I've been quite lucky to work at brands that have allowed me to see that and to know, what works and what's not. But
Yeah.
you do have to stand up for certain things and not negotiate as well.
Yeah. And I think that I like the build on knowing yourself, but knowing what environments you thrive in and which environments you don't, or cultures you thrive in. Not every organization is going to be a great fit for every individual in the same way, right? Or every role or every team. Tell me a bit more about, we talked a bit about this last time we met, but the difference between, as a marketer, the difference between being a good marketer and a great one, in your opinion?
I think a great one is one that can really leave you with an idea that's compelling, and that can hit you in a place that's meaningful. And that could be intellectual, that could be emotional, that could be societal, but it leaves you with an almost a mnemonic impression that makes you think about something powerful. And it's quite an art to be that straightforward, because like you said, you can get distracted with many different things. You could execute a media 500 different ways, but it's that purity of the idea and staying very clear to that. And then giving the degrees of freedom that I think is very important. I work a lot with film. And so I think it's very similar. It's like being a director, writer of a piece. You have amazing performers who go and deliver it, but the plot is the plot, and the look and feel is the look and feel. I mean, we remember Stanley Kubrick's movies for a reason, right? So that clarity is important, and then also knowing when to step back and what areas aren't yours, and where people can shine. You have to have both, and it's not easy, but I think that's what separates the great ones from the
good ones.
Yeah.
That purity of idea requires real commitment, doesn't it? And bravery too. Yeah.
I think it's almost an exercise in design, like very simplistic, like a Zaha Hadid moment. Like, what is the look you want? Like the idea, the purity of the message. It's really very hard, very, very hard.
But something you love, and now I'm going to make the connection back to actually what you studied as your passion when you were in Italy, right? But that it's kind of comes full circle, doesn't it? Some of this.
Well, yes, and also, I mean, because we were in Italy, we would study that. It was one of the curriculums, and it was just another class. But I didn't realize how much I would love it for the rest of my life. And sometimes it happens with my kids, trying to introduce them to something naturally, like organically. And those field trips we would take with the professors who needed the money to get to the weekend or whatever, and we'd stay in youth hostels, and we'd just see a city like Siena. That left an impression my whole life, and no one was teaching me in a book, and I didn't have to do homework, and I didn't have to take a test on it, but I loved it. And now with hindsight and with a bit more reflection, I know that that's what I love. And so I found myself in marketing, and especially in brand marketing roles, but now I know I love that. So now I look for it. And I also think my time in research, my time in PR, all of that served me well. And so one thing, and I hear this a lot from filmmakers saying to film students, is when you're starting out, try to do many different roles, because it doesn't mean you're going to go 500 ways in your career, but having that different knowledge of the different elements, especially in marketing, that makes it a lot more powerful, because you'll be able one day, if you manage and lead people, you'll be able to understand what they do and give them that space. And at the same time, your idea will be much richer because it'll have more dimensions.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important.
It's great advice. Somebody recently said to me, think about your career sort of trajectory, less like a linear like this and much more like a jungle gym, you know, where you're, especially in the early years of your career building, to build that experience. And tell me, so just sort of building on that advice, I know we've talked about role models before, haven't we? And there are more role models now for women in marketing than there were even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, definitely. But I know you've also got a particular point of view around role models and oneself, haven't you?
Yes, I do. Well, and also, I mean, some of my role models were brilliant women, but they sacrificed a lot to be leaders when I was in college and I was looking up to them. And I think it's very important to be inner directed and to be your own role model when you can. And what I mean by that is there's people who are very inspiring and you should absolutely learn from them, but you should find your own leadership style, because I think we have a lot more control of how people perceive us and how much impact we can have than we realize, especially early in our careers. And I think something I had a gift by accident through my father and my mother, that I'd be the first one to jump in if there was a problem. And again, you need to know what you're talking about, because if you're jumping in all the time and you don't know what you're doing, that doesn't help the situation. But if you do know what you're doing and you have something to say, I think it's vitally important, especially for women, to not wait to be asked. Be the person that people think about when they have a problem, because that will let you have a jungle gym experience that's so much richer than being the most pleasant person and always there and always serviceable, but in a position that you're not leading, you're following. And it's the same person. It's just a little bit of a shift of, you know, being there when people need you. And also in life, not only in business, being there when people need you, that moment they will always remember. So I think of course there's great role models, and we have them both in men and women and in all you know, parts of society and business and marketing, but don't leave yourself out of that equation. There's a lot more you can do than you realize, and sometimes it takes you a lot longer, a lot of life years to get to that point, and it shouldn't. It's a little secret you can have up front.
Brilliant advice, absolutely brilliant. I'm sure Diana will come back in a minute, because there'll be questions, but I've actually one question, just slightly changing tack, all in the same theme, of course. If we think about the industry, our industry, marketing industry, obviously the picture is improving, and there are more and more women in marketing all the time, albeit you know, there's still not enough at the senior levels in particular. What do you think is the next thing that needs to change or be focused on more with that, and you know, as we continue to make progress on this topic?
Well, I think gender bias is still absolutely with us, and it's not only the men. And I think that was my biggest eye opener, is women sometimes not appreciating other women's talents, even though they've been able to, you know, succeed thanks to other women and other men. I think we have to be aware of our own biases, because it's very, very tricky not to realize you also have biases. One thinks one's world is normal because you're perceiving it, but yes, but you have to really go there and really test it. And so fighting that is very important, addressing that, talking about that, and helping people out and being a safe place for someone to go to when they have an issue. Finding mentors who you can talk to in that moment about that, which is a specific kind of knowledge. The other thing, of course, is equality, gender pay, being equally paid for. And that is one thing I think after a point in your career, once you're up on your skis and you can pay your rent and whatnot, that you should really look at, is your company paying equally? Because that's something that I think also we can vote with our talent on. It's been a while now, so enough is enough, and that's important, and that's something that I think if for people who have that choice, to make that choice. And then the last thing is the next generation, Girls for Tech, for example. It's a program we do to get girls into STEM, and I mean, many of the brands I've worked with do things like this, but in the case of Mastercard, we have about 6,000 employees who are constantly mentoring women to get girls to get into technology, especially technology, and to feel comfortable and to not be intimidated sometimes by other women, frankly. Or by people they're growing up with. These are girls.
So 6,000 people inside the business that are mentoring people outside the business or inside the business, or both? Probably both.
So we have a program called Girls for Tech that we support. It's an initiative to get young girls into technology. And over the last couple of years, we've had 6,000 Mastercard employees go and mentor the girls and teach them and be part of the course and run the courses. And I think we've reached something like 1.5 million girls at this point. And we want to go to 5 million by 2025. But it's that next generation. So we help each other out now, but what comes next, building a wave, so to speak, a Mexican wave of women in tech.
Yeah, that is amazing. I've written that down. I'm definitely taking that away from this. We've got another question here, which is, I absolutely love this question, Jeannette. What is your bigger game? Do you have a North Star goal for your future from here?
Well, I've always been quite intuitive, and I always also try to balance my life with work and home and experiences, and I don't see them as separate. And so I'm a workaholic, but I'm a very happy workaholic because I love all of my life. And of course there's moments that it's not so easy. I'm not trying to pretend it's not, but it's I think what's very, very important for me is being able to create and to have a platform that drives change for good. And so my inclusion and the environment are really my bigger goals, for my children, for myself, for everyone I work with and care about, and anything that leads me to that. And that always has been increasingly more and more. I've kind of been self-selected into the marketing role, but I don't know if that's my whole journey either. There could be something more societal in my future. There might be something combined. And I'm in a little bit of a unique situation that in Mastercard, our CEO, our previous CEO, Ajay, created what's called doing well by doing good. So instead of doing well business-wise and doing good through CSR, you try to drive inclusion, financial inclusion, helping small, medium businesses, helping women in tech or whatever, girls or whatever, in the business line. So not separate. And so I do feel quite lucky to have the opportunity that if I want to do something bigger in the environment, I can in my role. And I realize that is very lucky. So it's not everybody has that opportunity, but But more and more, I think there's more brands out there that give you the opportunity to follow your bigger kind of philosophy North Star, not only your next career step. And I would always keep an eye on that, because it's a bigger part of life the older you get to have a meaningful one. So
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And I think I more and more brands and businesses are doing what you're already doing at Mastercard, which is integrating, looking after people, planet, society, communities into the day-to-day business and activity that they're, an activation that they're taking out to the world through their brand, so that, it's not a separate thing. It's definitely not a tick box. It's really, so I think, that you're, obviously you're quite ahead of the game on that in some ways, but that is happening, definitely, that shift to it being part of the fabric of the core business more and more, which is good. One more, hopefully we've got time for one more question. I'm going to squeeze one more in anyway, which is, so some people hate the term work-life balance. Some people use the term work-life blending, whichever language you'd like to use. How do you maintain that sense of balance and your whole self inside work, but also outside of work?
Well, a couple of years ago, I had the very odd opportunity for my husband and I to go to a headhunter at the same time, and we both got analyzed by that Myers-Briggs wheel.
Oh, yeah.
But we did it at the same time, and he's also a marketer. But he's a data scientist. He's like a deep data nerd, and I'm like the brand, and we learned. I learned that I was an extrovert and he was an introvert, and that he took in a lot of sense perception during the day and then relaxed by going out at night. And I'm a people person. I get like all excited and I give all my energy during the day, and at night I like to relax. And so that was something that I use a lot as a tool to know when I'm starting to hit a wall, because I'm very demanding with myself and I love doing my work, so I could do it forever, but I also love my children. I could stay with them for 7 days a week. So it's I just like what I do, but the day only has so many hours. And so knowing when I'm getting to that limit and I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to run on empty, and then prioritizing. One of the best things I ever did in my life for my career was get pregnant, because I had to prioritize for the first time.
That's interesting.
Cold turkey. I did 3 things and not 10, and I was going to do them well. And so I think those 2 things, knowing, what gives you energy and how you need to recuperate, and then being able to prioritize. So you do the big stuff and not try to do everything, especially as women, where we're expected to do everything all the time. Is really, really important.
Knowing, and even down on the energy piece, even down to listing, if you're struggling, and listing what's giving you or does give you energy and what's draining your energy, and then reevaluating how you're spending your time is just such valuable use of half an hour it's worth doing. So yeah, I love that. And last one, and then I think that Diana will rejoin us. So when you how was it taking your first pregnancy and coming back into the business? That's a sort of a landmark's the right word either, but that's a critical moment in a woman's career typically, and my personal view is not one that organizations always get right. What was your experience, and have you got any advice on that? It's a critical moment in time.
Well, because I'm an optimist, I thought I'd never had 3 months off. I planned to move house the same time I gave birth to my first child.
Okay.
I remember sitting with my son, who was like 3 weeks old, surrounded by boxes, thinking, oh my God, this is mad. But I dealt with it. It helped me lose some baby weight. I got through it. But again, I was lucky. I was working at Microsoft, which already had quite an enlightened policy, and my husband could take 2 weeks off. He was also working there. So it was something that helped tremendously at that moment. And you really feel, your entire body, your cognitive style, the way you perceive the world, everything changes when you have your first child, more than physiologically, more than you think. And so being at a place that can give you that space is very, very important. But I was able to get back in quite easily because I like the variety. I like the variety of being with my child, and then solving for a campaign that was unsolvable, whatever it was. I think one thing though that I have seen, and we have a program for that, which is Relaunch Your Career. It's especially designed for parents who have taken years off, a couple of years off after having a child. And there it can be very, very, very tricky to come back.
Yeah.
And it's on both sides. People perceive you that you're kind of out of the game or whatever it is, wrongly, but that's the perception. And people self-perceive themselves that they're not completely sure. And so it's a very vulnerable moment. And so bridging that gap, I think, is also something to have an eye out for and to help people through. And we do it in different ways. People can do it individually when they're coming back, or more dramatically if they take time out and they're having a hard time re-engaging.
Yeah, totally. Very good. Well, I mean, that is what I take from that in particular, is maintaining a good sense of humor is something that you did, but also having support and being able to ask for support from those around you at home as well. Which is important. Anyway, so I can see Diana's rejoined us. So as somebody said in the chat, you are remarkable.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nina.